Well, good evening, and I'd like to call to order this planning meeting for the town of Saugeen Shores. Welcome everyone in the chambers this evening. The first order of business is additions, deletions, or amendments, and we have nothing under that. The next item is a disclosure of pecuniary interest, and I'll remind every member of your responsibility to do so if you have one, and the general nature. Undeclared. Then the next item on the agenda is adoption of minutes of the November 20th meeting, and it's been moved by Councillor Matheson, second by Councillor Mike Myatt, that the Planning Committee minutes dated November the 20th, 2017 are hereby approved as circulated. Is there any errors, omissions, or discussion on this? All in favor? Carried. This evening we have 4 public meetings, and the purpose of the public meetings will be to hear the presentations of Bruce County Planning and any applicants, planners that would like to make a presentation to the committee. Then the committee will be given an opportunity to question or clarify anything that they hear in those reports. And then at a later date, at probably the next meeting, but we can't say for sure, but at a later date, planning staff will come back with a recommendation based on the information they hear tonight and on the planning documents that we have in the. So our first one then is Z. It's a zoning bylaw Z 74-17.44 for Terry and Susan Hartwick for 246 Saugeen Beach Road. And I'll turn it over to Tessa, our planner.
Great, thanks. So got the application information up there. So just an overview, this is a development proposal to facilitate 2 lot additions. And as a result of these lot additions, it will have to permit 2 dwelling units on 1 lot. So this would rezone the lot from the current residential first density special to a new special designation, but still first density, in order to permit this second dwelling unit. And it will also recognize existing legal non-complying interior side yard setback of the cabin on the lot. So just to give an overview of the site, it is in a residential area surrounded by residential land uses. It's on municipal water and private septic in the area. However, the lot in question at 246 has had its municipal water shut off and the private septic system has been removed. So that lot currently has no servicing as well as no access or frontage onto a municipal road. So this will help explain it a little bit better. So the site plan shows here. So 246 is this property. We've got 244, 248. So a little triangle of the lot will be added to 248, and then the rest of the lot will merge with 244. And that will include the cabin that currently exists on the lot as proposed. And you can see on this one, this is the legal non-compliance setback on this. So in terms of the land use policies, there are no issues in terms of provincial policies, in terms of heritage or natural features, and no issues as well with the county official plan. It is within the primary urban community of Saugeen Shores. At the Saugeen Shores official plan, it's designated shoreline residential. This proposal doesn't require any changes to this designation. In terms of the official plan policies for lot creation by consent, this proposal is not actually creating any new lots, but merging the lot onto the 2 abutting properties. And it would improve the current condition and allow the lot to meet policies for lot creation that it currently does not, in terms of frontage, access, and servicing. Zoning bylaw, as I said, it's zoned first density special. Section 3.1.1 does not allow for habitable space and accessory structures, and Section 3.6.3 of the zoning bylaw limits the number of dwelling units to a maximum of 1 per lot unless otherwise permitted. The R1 zone does permit secondary dwellings subject to conditions. The proposal does not meet all of those conditions for a secondary dwelling unit. Namely, it doesn't meet the conditions in terms of would be a standalone structure. It is not connected to municipal water and sanitary services. if this lot addition goes forward and the zoning is approved, it would be connected to municipal water, but it would be on private septic, and it is within 500 meters of Lake Huron. Currently, as I said, the cabin is not serviced, and so it wouldn't meet the definition of a dwelling, but servicing is proposed to be extended from the house on 244 to the cabin at 246. Once, it would be extended from this house here to the cabin servicing, so there wouldn't be any new municipal hookups created, but it would be serviced from the current house. And so, as a condition of consent, there might be requirements in terms of septic capacity, in terms of making sure that any septic on the lot could accommodate the increased use, and that would be something we would make sure that if the existing septic wasn't adequate, it would have to be upgraded if the zoning goes through. Okay. Here. So in terms of interdepartmental consultation, town staff have noted that any encroachments on the road allowance will have to be removed, and again, confirming that all servicing has to be on separate parcels, so there'll be no new municipal hookups for the servicing. There are no issues raised from agency comments, and we haven't received any public comments at this time. We did receive a complete application. It was circulated to agencies and the public, and we are holding the public meeting currently, and we'll come back at a later day with a recommendation. And so just to recap what this is proposing, it's facilitating this lot addition that will allow for that cabin to exist on the same lot as the current house at 246. So 246, once it's merged, 244, once it's merged, would have two dwelling units on it. And so this meeting is for information purposes only. And so we wanted to present this application, hear your thoughts, and then come back with a recommendation.
Thank you, Tessa. Any questions for Tessa from the committee? Councillor Grace? I'll go to that. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question about is on the second dwelling, the cabin. So just so I'm clear, the intent is to service the cabin from the larger dwelling, to use it as a secondary dwelling for guests, possibly, and at some point even rent it. Is that my understanding clear from the application?
Yes. Yeah. So our understanding from the applicant is that their intent in the short, medium term would be to have it as a guest cabin for when their children come to visit, mostly. But we want to treat this as the possibility that it could be lived in 365 days a year, fully occupied, even though that isn't the intent right now. But going forward with this, that would be the potential for this lot.
Okay, so we don't allow that now, do we? I mean, if
No.
people make an application to have a room above their garage, even if it's a big garage, they wouldn't be able to do that?
No.
They wouldn't be able to do that in a bunkie, a large bunkie?
So yeah, so a bunkie would generally be described as a place without any servicing, but would have the ability for human habitation, so like sleeping quarters. Our official plan, or our zoning bylaw, doesn't have any provisions for bunkies here. Yeah, so that's.
So I guess what I'm having problems with is, why would we allow it in this case? What is the exception that would make this a good idea when we say to other people, no, you can't do that?
Well, we're not coming with a recommendation at this point, but there are serious issues with this lot as it currently exists, being landlocked, and it's not a lot configuration that is what we would typically like to see. So our issue is, with this second dwelling, in terms of how council decides to deal with it. We haven't made our recommendation yet, but we definitely have issues currently with this landlocked parcel existing.
I think I maybe got a little out of order here. I think the next, we'll give all the committee a chance to question everybody. I think it's appropriate, perhaps, if the applicant would like to speak, and then we'll go to any comments from the public, and then we'll go back to the committee for questions. So is the applicant here and would like to speak to this issue, or anybody on behalf of the applicant? Anybody from the public would like to speak to this issue? And Councillor Minaj.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In a similar vein, first of all, I'd like to say thank you for the work on getting these lots sorted out, because it looks like the right thing to do. And I would understand that it's eventually it would be legal non-conforming to have the second residence on one property in that location, because it's an established building from many years ago. Unless of course we enter into some sort of provisionary statements that say, no, you can't, and you must get rid of that building if you're going to have this lot change made. Or is there an opportunity for us to say we need to inspect the current septic system to see whether it can handle an additional, are there provisions that we could ask for that say, before saying yes to this application in its entirety, that we would want a septic system and inspection protocol completed to say that the estimate is that half a dozen or a dozen people could actually exist in the cottage and use a washroom facility there, and the septic system can handle it. Because I think that would be valuable information if we're going to go forward with this. And my second point, which is similar, Mr. Mayor, is these references to the future. Well, maybe we'll do a rental. Maybe we'll do a rental. I obviously like the idea that extended family could come and use it, and if that septic system can handle it. But the idea that, well, we're going to make it available for rental or for the future, I think you were correct in making that assumption that we would have to deal with it being a rental entity right from the beginning and not deal with the hypothetical. So if that's the case, then we've got to look at all those other provisions that we might need that say that how many people could rent it, and is the parking available, is the driveways available, are all those other things available. So I would hope that when this comes back, that we've made a decision, or staff have made a decision, that it's either family or it's rental. And if it's just going to be family for the future, then we need to put some provisions in that say we need to inspect it annually to see that it is not being. And I don't know how you would do that, but it might be a bylaw enforcement thing. It might be, it sounds like Big Brother is watching, but somehow if we're going to say go ahead and use a family extension and no to a rental, we have to have some way of doing that. Thank you.
Councillor Dave Mayette, then I'll get there.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just for my own clarity, what we're saying here is that we're actually fixing a problem, maybe two problems, and in doing so, we're creating another problem. So the question before us will be, as far as the question before me will be, which of the problems is worse? Is it better to correct these the land and the lot problems, and by doing so create a situation where we have a non-conforming dwelling, or not allow the merger and live with the existing problem, which I think is a bigger problem in my own right. So I think going forward, I would probably be in favor of what's being proposed here.
Councillor Mike Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm very familiar with living down in that area, very familiar with this whole situation. That cottage at the back is landlocked, and so it becomes abundantly clear you either tear the cottage down, or you create a situation where it's an existing cottage and you allow the secondary dwelling unit on the site with two cottages on the same building lot. So that's what it really comes down to. My question, though, to the planner is, if this was approved, where would the access be back to the back cottage, and which side of the front cottage? How do you get back to that cottage? And is there ample parking? So where's the access? Where would the access happen?
I believe the current right-of-way is on this side. The driveway is coming up this way, so there is an existing right-of-way for access. But now the property, they own both properties, the Hartwigs. They own both 246 and 244. So it's no longer kind of relevant once you're the owner on both the right-of-way.
So I know where the driveway is, and it's on the south side of the existing cottage, right where you're showing. That's where the driveway is.
I believe so. It's on there.
It
is a driveway.
It is.
Yeah.
You're correct.
Yeah.
And so that would be the owner who would now own both. Basically, a shared driveway, right?
Yeah.
Shared driveway to go back to the back.
Yeah.
The second thing is with the septic system with the back cottage. I understand all hydro has been disconnected for
Yes.
quite some time. The septic bed. Who determines if this was approved? Who determines if that septic bed is suitable? Who supervises it, monitors it? Who's called in to do what? How's the determination made that septic system is okay to be used? And that would be through you, right, Bart? Like you'd be overseeing that whole process?
Yes.
Right. Right. I understand we have I think it's 500 meter for secondary dwelling units from our waterfront. Is that correct? Set 500 meter, and this is within that. So really, it would be non-conforming to that policy. But I believe that you've got an existing I know we're not making a decision here tonight, but you've got an existing cottage that I believe we're correcting a landlocked situation that could turn out to be something a whole lot better. So, for all it's worth, I know we're not making a decision tonight. Thank you.
Any further questions? Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to the planner. I guess my comment would be, or suggestion, I guess, for when you return with a recommendation on this, is that you don't suggest any restrictions on use. Come back with a recommendation for something that's going to work and that where we don't need to impose controls on the use, controls which we won't be able to enforce and which never will be enforced. Come back with a simple bylaw that in my view, allows this to go forward without restrictions. If it's impossible to put something together that doesn't have restrictions, then I think we need to reconceive the whole thing because the restrictions will be pointless. They won't be enforced. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Rich.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. So how long has that cottage existed for?
I'm not sure exactly, but it's quite old. It's been there.
For,
It's
like 50 years or something like that.
Probably. Yeah, I don't have the exact date.
So through this whole time, people have been living there 5 days, basically.
Not 365 days, but I have been told that it has been rented even more recently than when the servicing was removed. So the past owner was still, it was being used, even just for sleeping quarters and that sort of thing, by the previous owner before it was bought.
I guess my thing, or my point is, or recommendation, is that if that cottage has been used for somebody for a prolonged period, suddenly just because someone else owns it, letting a whole bunch
Vice Deputy Mayor Hubert.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have had, over the years, applications that are along the shoreline where part of the process is, as soon as there's an application, you're able to correct some things that are not so good or in fact wrong given today's rules. So I appreciate what Councillor Mayette said about, you've got, it's an application that corrects a couple things and then sets in place something that wouldn't fit anymore. Important to note, though, and I guess precedence is not supposed to always play a role in this, but we've had a tradition or a history of when there is an application, it gives us a chance to correct things. And so we've taken that opportunity and we've done that. So, and there have been a couple of other examples over the years that I've sat on planning where we have had situations very similar to this where we have required the removals of things prior to things happening. I also would ask if it's possible through our own development coordinator, if maybe we could have an indication of, I appreciate the comment about the landlocked lot. I would be curious to know how many of those still exist. I believe that there's not very many along the shore anymore, but just there's at least one area in Southampton I can think of that I think there's 3 properties that share an access because of that situation. But I'd just be curious to know how many of this sort of landlocked situation still exists. So perhaps that could be an information piece for later on. But you know, we have required removals of things in the past when applications come to correct things, and so I like the way that Councillor Mayette put it. You know, it's like you're correcting something, but you're creating something else, and that's you have to take into consideration what you feel is the balance there. So I like the way he put that, but this is an example that we've had before here, and we've made decisions to remove things. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I know what you're referring to, Diana. I think Council a number of years ago said where there was encroachments on public lands that they would, when they had the opportunity, they would correct them. But I don't. This is not. I don't think there's any encroachments here now on town property. These are all wholly on private property. Is that correct?
All of 246, the lot in question that's being divided, is definitely on private property. Yeah. I know the town's comments had to do with some encroachments, but our mapping doesn't actually show the road allowance along that portion of Saugeen Beach Road, so I have to leave that to the town to confirm if any of the kind of frontage on the properties have any encroachment, but definitely no buildings would.
Thank you. Any further questions? If not, then we will leave that with our planners and to come back with a recommendation. I don't know. Do you want to motion? So the next item on the agenda then is, again, it's a zoning bylaw amendment. It's Z73-17.44 for Wanda Snoblin for 3933 Bruce Road 3. And again, I'll turn it over to Tessa.
Got the information up there. So this is a development proposal to facilitate a surplus farm dwelling severance. So this is in the agricultural zone, and it would be to rezone the lot agricultural special for the retained. So most of the agricultural lands to prohibit future development, and then agricultural special for the severed farm, dwelling lot, which would allow the reduced lot frontage and area, and recognize any deficient setbacks due to any other deficient setbacks. Yeah, the EP would remain unchanged on the lot. So, got the location there. It's agricultural, surrounded by agricultural, private servicing on Bruce Road 3. The proposed site plan shows the farm dwelling severance, so that's the blue area is the area proposed to be severed. And as a condition of consent, the dwellings on the retained farmlands will be demolished. So that's been agreed to by the applicant. So these buildings all over here are intended to be demolished at time of consent. So there's, in terms of provincial policy, the PPS allows for surplus farm dwelling severances in agricultural areas as a result of farm consolidation. And so we don't have any problems there. No archaeological or natural heritage issues were raised in our review. The EP area is well away from this proposed severance area, so we don't have any issues there. In terms of the Bruce County official plan, again, severances in the ag area are permitted if it's for farm consolidation, and the applicant has demonstrated that they are a bona fide farmer. They have own and farm other lands in Bruce County, and this land is surplus to their needs, and so it meets the criteria. In terms of the the zoning bylaw, we would be looking just to rezone it in order to allow for the minimum lot area. The bylaw requires 39 hectares in the ag area in order to keep farm sizes appropriate, and a frontage of 100 meters. The proposed severed dwelling lot would have a frontage or a lot area of 1.7 acres, which is in the appropriate range for these types of severances, and a frontage of 44 meters. We would also recognize any deficient setbacks due to MDS requirements, but MDS guideline number 9 states that we're not required to meet those setbacks where the existing surplus dwelling, where the dwelling to be severed is existing, and the conflict due to odors already exists. So we don't have any issues from an MDS perspective in this case here. In terms of interdepartmental consultation, town staff raised issues with the road allowance at the rear of the property, but they have no objections provided that it relates to the lands owned only by the landowner. We don't anticipate that this particular severance would have any issues with that road allowance, as it's not. Those lands would just be rezoned. The ones abutting this road allowance would just be rezoned in order to prohibit residential development as per the norm in this area. No issues raised by the agencies or public circulation. And we've gone through all the process requirements in terms of a complete application, circulation, public notice, and we're currently in the public meeting. We will return later with a recommendation. So to recap, surplus farm dwelling severance, this is for information only. And yeah.
Thank you, Tessa. Is the applicant here or anyone from the applicant would like to speak to this issue? Is there anyone from the public who would like to speak to this issue? Is there any questions from the committee? Councillor Minaj.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would just like clarification on, just trying to understand from the one, if you can go back to the the one with the blue drawing on it. So there's one driveway now onto the property off of Bruce County Road 3. It will be retained with the blue entity. How does a separate owner access that farm property after that severance has gone through?
If you'd like, I may be able to answer that. Typically, there are alternate access laneways onto farm parcels like this. In this particular case, I'm not sure if there is. If there is not, then there would need to be an entrance permit issued from the county to access that land, which generally is the norm. Our county highways usually will provide at least one other access onto the farm lot. They will almost always permit 2 accesses onto an original farm parcel. But I'm not certain in this case whether an extra one is needed. It would and can be a condition of approval of the consent that goes with this application. So when the consent is given provisional approval, that requirement for an entrance permit from the county would be part of that. If that failed for some reason, which we don't normally see it happening, but if that failed for some reason, then the consent would fail and the parcel would remain with, or the house would remain with the farm.
Just for clarity, there is access to the back of the property off of, I guess it's Cassidy Road, isn't it, Cassidy? Councillor Dave Mapp. Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
I just wanted to make the comments. This is the second time in a number of months that we've seen a surplus farm dwelling severed. And again, we note the problem that we have in our zoning bylaw of not having a provision to allow that. Our minimum requirement here for severance is 39 hectares, but we're going to have surplus farm dwellings severed in the township of Saugeen. And, they're going to happen more of them, all that we've had 2 in the last 12 months, right? So I really would like to make the comment to council and to the planning staff, can we get some amendments come back to solve that? I mean, these people are spending a bunch of money getting these zoning amendments done, and they don't probably, in lots of cases, don't need to. They could comply. We could have a zoning bylaw that they could comply to, and we could solve this for them. And I'd really like to see the administration, in cooperation with Bruce County Planning, come back with some proposals on how we could amend the zoning bylaw to fix this. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Desmarais.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just with regards to the secondary entrance to the property, I'm looking at a different program here that shows it more detailed, and it would appear that there is a secondary entrance at the southeast corner of the property. But besides that, by the blue lines or the blue shaded area that's shown here, those are identified as surplus buildings. Would it be then natural that the barn, which looks like an agricultural facility, looks like a cattle paddock in the back, is that then not surplus to the operation? Does the owners intend to continue a livestock operation there in what would be very close proximity to a residential property? That would be a question for the...
No, it's my impression that it wouldn't be. These dwellings these buildings are going to be demolished. There won't be any livestock. It'll just be, the harvesting the fields. This will all be demolished here, and this is a house and a garage. I'm pretty sure these aren't. It's just a house and a garage.
A house and a drive shed are being retained, are being surplused. And
yes.
The barn is being retained on the property.
But will be demolished as a condition of consent.
Okay, so was there any proposal then to include the barn and the paddock area in the severance?
No, that wasn't the intention of the applicant.
No?
No.
Okay, it just occurs to me that if a person is intending on buying a farm property, a rural property, albeit a small acreage, that having the barn included would make the property more attractive, and unless the barn is derelict and it needs to be removed for safety purposes.
I'm not sure what the status is. My impression is the current owner tends to continue farming this land as they have been, and I don't know if there's what livestock operation might be here, but they're not planning on selling the farm parcel. It will continue to be farmed by the applicant, and they're just planning on severing the dwelling and selling the dwelling separately.
The dwelling and the drive shed, but the barn stays with them.
It will be demolished.
It will be demolished.
Yeah.
I would ask then that you ask the applicants if they would be willing to retain the barn and the paddock area in the severance.
Generally, that wouldn't be our practice in a surplus farm dwelling severance, as this isn't. It no longer would be a farming operation on this portion. If it was so generally, we would only retain those buildings necessary, or we would sever those buildings necessary for the surplus house and any accessory structures that go along with the dwelling. But then on the retained lands, we wouldn't generally include those as part of the severance. Those other buildings.
Well, obviously, such was not always the case, because I live on a severed farmhouse with an accessory building, and the barn was part of the severance, so I own the barn still. Paddock area, which, quite frankly, although we're not farming per se, very useful structure to have.
Yeah, I don't know, but I just know that the intention of the applicant was to do this, and then we would to just sever off the house, and we'll have those buildings demolished, so we don't have any issues in terms of MDS setbacks once the lots are created.
Thank you.
Any further questions? If not, then I guess we will leave that with our planners again for a future meeting. So the next item on the agenda then is a big long number, and I'm not going to read it all. It's various construction and installations for 526 Ivings Drive. And again, I'll turn it over to our planner for presentation.
Okay, I'll present this one, and this involves a major revision to the Blue Water subdivision owned by Barry's Construction in Port Elgin, south end of Port Elgin. There is a concurrent application for rezoning of parts of the draft approved subdivision as it exists right now. So moving ahead. Technical problem. I think I've jumped ahead. Okay, so to look at the overview here, the development proposal results in a net increase of dwelling units, small but small increase in the number of dwelling units and residential lots, and it would extend the lapse date on a second phase, or after the final approval of the first phase, it would change the lapse date to 5 years from the current 3-year period that's in the conditions of approval that were given about last year in the draft approval. The zoning amendment that goes with this application would rezone portions of the land to an R1 special to permit increased lot coverage to 45% on the lot, to R3 special provision to permit 3 things there: increased lot coverage to 55%, reduced exterior side yard setback to 4.5 meters, which is consistent with an R1 zone, and reduced rear yard setback to 6.75 meters, which would reduce the rear yard size, obviously. The only change to the existing zones on the property, which are R2-4, R4-2, and EP6 zones, is simply the extent of the zone, not the provisions that are provided for development in those zones. And as I go through the slides, I'll get to some maps here where I can explain a little bit further what those changes look like. So the subdivision is in draft approval. It's for residential uses. There are residential uses abutting the property, both developed residential and vacant. There is institutional use that is related to the CAW Unifor development in the southwest corner of the map that's showing there on the screen. And there are a number of existing year-round municipal roads that provide access to this property, including Ridge Street, Pearson Avenue, Buckley Lane, Sunset Boulevard, Bruce Street, and Ivings Drive. So now to look at the proposed lot layout that is in this major revision, the plan would look as it is with the lotting that's on the screen there now. One of the comments coming back, and I'm going to mix things up a little bit, I'm sorry, but one of the comments coming back from municipal staff was that they wanted to limit the driveway entrances onto Bruce Street because it is going to operate as a collector road there. And so there's been a proposal by the developer that the lots that are generally within that oval-shaped area on the screen, and in particular the blow-up section that's down in the lower right-hand corner, is essentially showing a block of lots that will flip. So as proposed, there was going to be single detached lots on Street A, an interior road, with townhouse lots along Bruce Street at that location. The municipality wishes to have the lower density development along Bruce Street to reduce the number of driveway entrances, which made sense, and the developer was happy to do that flip that addresses the the driveway entrances on a Bruce Street. So everybody seems to be in agreement on the concept of just flipping those lots the way they're presented to put the lower density development along Bruce Street. The zoning, and I hope that I could read that more easily on the screen, which I can't, but the existing zones and the colors have done something a little odd there too, but the reddish brown, as it sort of appears up there on the screen right now, to me at least, is R1 zoned area that exists in the current draft approved plan. There is a light purple-ish color, I'm not sure even what to call it, at the lower part of the sort of lower right, and then another purple color that is above that on the right and over toward the left side, which would be closest to the lake. Okay. So, yeah, great. Okay, so this lighter purple area is there. That is R2 currently. There is a darker purple there and over here, which is, sorry, I may have those backwards actually. I do. So that, sorry, the one here and over here is the R2. The one that I had pointed to before is that R42? Is R42 is the big block. These are multi-residential blocks down here. And then the R3, and the R3 is this turquoise color in the middle. And then there's a stormwater management facility here proposed. On the right-hand side is the proposed zoning. And it as initially proposed. So you've got the same residential one here in the reddish brown. It is whether you can see this better than I can, but there's residential one here, which was the lower density development that I referred to just before that was going to be flipped, and then townhouse development here. Those will actually be flipped. So this was the original proposal, and they've come back now and flipped that. But then the rest of it will be more or less as it's shown there on the screen. The multi-res block down here at the bottom of the screen is going to be slightly smaller in size, and they're going to provide a few more single lots and so on in the development to replace some of that medium density. The other change that can be seen here is the stormwater management facility or block is somewhat larger in size, and that is because of the lot coverages and so on that are proposed, which will essentially reduce the stormwater infiltration that's possible on those properties, and therefore require a larger stormwater management facility to be built here at the top of the bluff before it goes out to the lake. The next screen, again, it shows the switch here that is proposed now and has been agreed to more or less to satisfy the town's request for the lower density along Bruce Ave. The other change that is seen here is in these are broken apart somewhat from being shown on the same plan, but essentially most of this remains the same, and I'll get through to the end where it shows some differences. Actually, on the right hand screen there, it's showing some increased density in this area. Again, the original proposal, which is this, and those increased densities in this area, and that swap again that's occurring there, which are essentially the primary differences here in the plan, and the reduced area, somewhat reduced area of the multi-res blocks down here by taking some lots off of this end of the smaller multi-res block. And that highlights the larger stormwater management facility that would be required as a result of the higher density. So again, to sort of come back one step, this subdivision was draft approved about a year ago, I believe it is, so there was a thorough review of the provincial policy statement and so on at that time. There's been nothing substantial that has affected consistency with provincial policy. The official plan, again, it's a plan of subdivision. It's within a primary urban settlement area, so that's consistent with county policy. The land is designated for residential use in the local plan. And as I've mentioned, I've gone through the zoning there and tried to give you a sense of what those changes are and where they're located in the zoning. I should have probably mentioned, and I'll do it. I'll come back to that at the end when I'm recapping. The application was circulated to agencies in the public. Town staff, you can see on the screen there, they asked for the reduction of entrances on Bruce Street. That's been accommodated by the developer. The developer should consider a single that's the same thing. Sorry. And blocks 262 and 263 shall be transferred to the town. Those exist on the west side. Those exist as parcels within a park portion. I'll go back to this just so that I can. In this area, there's this blank area. There's an existing park or open space area that could potentially be parkland at some point in time or whatever, or multi-resident recreational type use. Down in this very bottom corner, there seems to be an infrastructure portion of area of land that needs to be retained by the municipality. And also up somewhere in this area, there is, again, it may be serve multiple functions, but one of the functions, it appears to me, is that there's some thought given to possibly taking a driveway entrance off of this street into this open space or potential parkland that has been mentioned in town comments and would be consistent, or are the two blocks that are referred to here, 262 and 63, that the municipality maintains some interest in or would like to have ownership of. Conditions of after approval will need to be revised to allow for the longer lapsing date in particular, and there may be other things that come up as required here to address these blocks and other matters that the town would like to have formally in the subdivision agreement at some future time. It was circulated to agencies in the public, as I mentioned. The agencies come back with, and you saw the town's issues. None of the other agencies raised any issues or concerns. Having it been recently draft approved, I think it had undergone sufficient review at that time. There was one letter or email received by us from a neighbor, and in that letter the individual was raising concerns about traffic, and what he meant by that was construction traffic using Stickle and Andrews streets to access the development. I'm just putting that out there. We haven't considered how to address that at this point in time, but we're aware that there is a concern about that. Whether or not it can be addressed, I don't know. But there has been that comment made to try to limit or avoid heavy construction traffic in those areas. We received a complete application. Circulation went out to agencies of the public, as I had mentioned. There is a public consultation period. We've got that one comment that we've received, and this is a public meeting that we are discussing the proposed changes to the plan that are part of the major revision, and it will come back at a later time for a decision by council. Opportunity to review it, and we've got all the input we need. So the application essentially is to extend the lapse date for subsequent phases after the first phase. This provides a little more time for the developer to develop the land, and than if it was the 3-year lapsing date. 3 years goes by fairly quickly at times. This is an information meeting, and we will come back with recommendations after we've thoroughly aired the issues with public and so on and so forth. So, So we can take questions and.
Thanks, Bruce. I think we'll see if the applicant. Is there anyone from the applicant who would like to speak to this issue? Application. Just want to come up to the mic so we know. Sure. But you're here.
I just wanted to say that the planner for Barry's Construction was ill tonight. So I'm with GM Blue Plan, the engineers involved in the project. So I just want to let you know if there was any questions that perhaps that the county planner couldn't answer, I could assist.
Thank you very much. Any member from the public would like to speak to this? Questions from the committee. I'll start over here. Councillor Mike Matt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I don't know whether it's a question to the engineer or to Amanda, but with the 518 dwelling units and with increased lot coverage is obviously the request. I'm wondering about the outflow to the lake and the route that the groundwater is going to take. There's going to be a whole lot more water. I understand we're retaining a parcel for a stormwater retention pond above. And my question is, what's the route where the water eventually is going to take to make its way to the lake, or is all of the water being retained in the stormwater retention pond, or is it eventually going to end up down in Lake Huron is my question, and what's the route? So what percentage are we retaining up above?
So the water gets into the stormwater pond. There's the outlet from there. There's an existing culvert that goes down the bluff, the slope. From there, there's open ditches, and then a culvert that conveys it from Shipley, across Shipley Avenue to the lake. And all of those ditches, everything is located on town lands.
So, is that the, would that be the McKinnon Lane outlet, or is it further to the north? Where exactly is this water going to end up? In front of which cottages, which outlet, which beach access point? Where is the outlet, Amanda?
That is by the McKinnon Lane, but this is stuff that's worked out through the detailed design after the draft plan modification gets through. So we've been in consultation with GM Blue Plan to make sure that their peak flows and volumes and all that meet our requirements.
So there are, I'm sure maybe Councillor Grace might want to comment on this too, because she's heavily involved with the project over in Southampton right now. But my question was, are there alternate methods towards retaining more water up top than a stormwater retention pond? Are you looking at alternate methods that would reduce the amount of water that's going to end up down Lake Huron?
So this is still a detailed step, so the modification doesn't change the requirements at the outlet. The outlet requirements stay the same. They have to match the pre-development peak flows. So because there's an increased level of imperviousness, it means they need to do more retention up on the tablelands, and that's why you see the increased area in the stormwater management pond. So because of this modification, the engineering design details have to change, but it's still the same outlet requirements as the original draft plan. It's a detailed design. We can make those requirements at that stage. Right now, we are convinced that the block shown on this draft plan modification is large enough to meet the requirements of the engineering department and the ministry.
So just to finish up, Mr. Mayor, we've got I think there's 27 outlets. My last number, between 25 and 30, I believe, where there's outlets from tablelands up above, where water is making its way down to Lake Huron, and there's some serious situations in terms of what's happening to our waterfront with the waters from the tablelands up above ending up down to Lake Huron, and how it's being handled not only up above, but how it's handled down on our lakefront. And that was my question really, is are there ways to retain more of the water up top before it makes its way down to Lake Huron to cause the kind of problems we're seeing on our beachfront? And I think you know what I'm speaking of. 35 Sauga Beach Road, for example, Amanda, and the situation Councillor Grace has been dealing with in council. So that was my question: is there are there alternate methods? So I think I've.
Vice Deputy Mayor Hubert.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't know who perhaps can comment on this. It was really difficult to read all the drawings that we got, and it wasn't easier when they were blown up there. So it was hard to understand just what was moving around. Basically, what I saw was that there's a road that's disappearing from the mix. So there was a tiny little offshoot off of Bricker Street to the new street. I believe it was A on the drawings. And I'm curious to know how that fits into any kind of access considerations we might have in terms of safety and security of those properties that would be created. I was also curious to know, it appears as though, when you just look at the sort of culmination of the whole report, you see that 507 units is becoming 518 units. So, if you just look at that at face value, it looks like, there's more housing going to be created. But then when you get into the nitty-gritty, I'm curious to know, to just have it said out loud, because it appears that 20 duplex lots, which would have been 40 units in the original subdivision plan, are becoming 96 street townhouse lots. So I'm just curious to have said out loud here what the distinction is between a duplex lot, which require two dwelling units on one lot, what our definition of street townhouse is, because that's a big jump in one area. I would appreciate just for future, if when we get drawings that are as intricate as this, that if they can be one drawing per page, so that then even when you blow them up on your computer screen, it's a little easier to see, because I think street townhouse lots are probably a newer style of housing that will be more attractive in terms of marketing, but certainly the density issues in certain sections of this appear to be going up big time from what we originally approved. So I just would appreciate a comment very specifically about, the road situation, but also then about, what defines a street townhouse lot that would give us encouragement to imagine just changing something over, which is doubling the intensification of a particular block or blocks that have been created in a previous subdivision plan.
I think the shortest answer to that question is that the developer has a market, or believes he has a market, for townhomes over duplexes. And secondly, the proposed development, and this gets back to some of the questions about reduced rear yards and various things like that and the higher coverages that he's proposing in the development. What he's hoping to provide in this development is more units that are, if you wish, geared to seniors and people who are trying to downsize. And so in the center, and I guess I can go back to those drawings, even though they're not great, I agree. But in this center section here, a lot of that is now going to be senior, or if you want to, I'm not sure that it'll be only seniors, but they're going to be bungalow townhouses, and some with, if they want additional bedrooms, they'll offer a loft on a second floor, but that the main bedroom and all of the essential living elements of the dwelling are on one floor. So obviously they'd be attractive to seniors, I think, and that has now forced them, well, maybe not necessarily forced them, but they would like to be able to push the lot coverage up, so because the bungalow units take up more area on the ground. To be able to provide a reasonable sized unit. And so in particular in that area, in the center of this proposed development, is where they intend to provide a lot of those units. And so the rear yards will be smaller, the yards will be smaller overall, and there'll be less grass to cut by whomever. If they're freehold units or street towns, which is essentially a freehold unit, then the individual property owners would normally be cutting the grass. And again, to make it attractive to seniors, you don't want to have them out cutting the grass all day long because they're hopefully going to be out playing golf or something else with their free time if they can afford it. So that's one of the main changes that he's made in the plan. Is he has replaced a number of the duplex or semi-detached or whatever you want to call those lots that had been provided in the original plan with townhouse lots, and he's targeting a very specific or fairly specific market, and that is the older individuals who are downsizing, the family's moved out, there's just two people in a household or whatever, and they don't want stairs.
Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
So a similar type development in terms of the actual structures would be sort of like what's just been happening in Grenville Estates in Southampton, although those are condo units, because they're bungalows with the potential for a loft above the garage. This would also be similar to what we did on Meadow Creek, where we created townhouse lots. You recall, this is similar to that then? No, not Smurf Village. They did townhouses there, and then they came back to us to create them into freehold lots. So there is an example elsewhere in the community where something like this exists. Thank you.
Councillor Minaj.
Mr. Mayor, so my questions would be, we're R3 question mark, so we haven't decided. So R3 itself, for some of these changes, the R3 zone says 35% lot coverage. And then we have R3-2 that says 45% lot coverage, and R3-3 that says 55% lot coverage. So we're creating a new R3 at 55% lot coverage, or we're going to follow the current R3-3? So that would be my first question. The point to the question is that I believe Smurf Village is the only R3-3 that we have over off of Albert Street South, and that's the current R3-3. Sorry? Off of McNabb? There's a number of streets that it's off of, but okay, fair enough. So it's new. It's relatively new at this level of this number of properties. So clearly the 55% is coverage is troubling. You gave good reasons why it should be that way, because it's going to be geared to seniors, less yard to look after, no yard to look after, because it's all going to be covered with a home. Essentially, that's a 60% change in lot coverage over the R3 designation. So the R3 designation says 35%. This is 55%. So this is a major change to a major number of property lots in that location. I'm not convinced yet that that's the right answer, but I also know that planning can be changed with a swipe of a pen. So zoning can be changed with a swipe of a pen. So it doesn't really matter what I think. The references to intensification, that there's 20.7 units per hectare on this development, and we have that so-called intensification number that we're working with, where we're trying to continually increase it, and yet it's a number that's out there, and we have no knowledge of what that number is. Is there any chance that we can wrestle that number to the ground and say we've met our 10% intensification by doing things like this? And that'll be an open-ended question for thought. So other things that are interesting to me are where my kids live in Waterloo. There's a multi-hundred home subdivision and probably 500 homes and new homes being built in the same area. And they have planned for a corner store. And I've asked this question before. And why are we not planning for corner stores? So if you're going to ask me to believe that the seniors that live in these 55% lot coverage homes don't want to cut their grass, they may just want to walk to the corner store rather than drive to somewhere else. So why is it that we can't have a corner store lot in these developments? So that would be a question I would like answered, if possible. And so there's no utility requirements. We haven't got to the point where more transformer stations are required. We don't need, in a massive subdivision agreement like this, we don't need any more. They're not saying where any more future transformer stations are required. That's already been dealt with. West Ontario Power City. Well,
they circulate this to West Ontario Power, so West Ontario Power would be able to understand if they need more infrastructure and would comment on that. So West Ontario has been, well, in this case it'll be OP Ontario or Hydro One. That's outside the former. I believe this is Hydro One boundaries, isn't it? So these are circulated. That's why they circulate it to all these agencies for their comments on those types of things now.
Mr. Mayor, why is this Hydro One? Why can't this be West Ontario Power? It's inside the urban development of
Neil, that's not for discussion for this now. It's a whole. I don't disagree to having that discussion, but that's not for tonight. So can you please stick to the application?
All right, I think I'm done.
Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
I just make a very brief comment, Mr. Mayor. I think this is an excellent change. I think it's going to provide more of the kind of housing that we need in the community, more housing for the type of people that the planner was just talking about. Seniors who need housing, who need it to be less expensive and easier to maintain. So I think this is a good change. I'm supportive of it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councilor Mike.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I was about to make similar comment. You have a developer here that's investing significantly in our community, and I mean 518 lots, and he just approved a plan of subdivision for north of Beaner Park for another 250 lots, and they've bought up land all over the town. So they're investing significantly, and of course they need to do their part. And I echo my comments about the ability to get that water out of the top part down to the lake and do a nice job with the outlets. But I agree with our deputy mayor. I think this is a really good alternative for housing in our community, and if it's something that we don't want to see, then I guess this council can decide not to approve it. But I certainly am very much in support of what Barry's are trying to do here, because I think it's that not everybody can afford that $500,000, $700,000 home. This might be providing an alternative for that $300,000 home in the community, whatever the number is. So I just look forward to the final report coming back. One question I do have. We talk about 518 units and then another 250, 300 unit subdivision plan we just approved north of Beener. Could we at some point, Mr. Mayor, find out the number? Like we approved a subdivision a couple north of the river, Summerside north. We've got Snyder subdivision. We've got a whole bunch of lots that we've approved. Do we know the number? Are we getting up into 1,500?
I think you can probably direct that.
Can we
to Bart?
So it's a question I have, Mr. Can we get that sometime?
Well,
I'd be interested.
I suspect
in knowing.
you absolutely can. You don't need to give it tonight, Bart, if you don't. But
Yep.
if you have it, by all means, let's hear it.
Do you
So
have a
maybe we
ballpark
can.
figure, Bart? It's getting up there. It's getting pretty high. Be nice to know how many outstanding. 1,000, 1,500, 2,000. Be interested to know that number.
Any further questions? I concur. I think these developers really know their market, especially this particular developer knows his market, knows what people want in the community, and now he's responding to it. And I think we need to help him along. Anyways, if there's no further questions, we will take that back to again for a recommendation, and we have, one more public meeting tonight, and it's zoning bylaw 75-1746 is for Jerry, Karen, John, Barry, and Brianne Moss. It's for 553 Bricker Street. And I guess I'll get Tessa, you can make the presentation.
Great. So we've got the information up there. So to overview, this is a proposal to facilitate the severance of a vacant residential building lot. So the lot is currently zoned institutional. So it would rezone the severed portion of the institutional lot to residential fourth density special in order to permit a 5-unit townhouse to be built. And this would require a reduction in terms of lot area, interior side yard, rear yard, and lot frontage. But it should be noted that these setback calculations will depend a little bit on where we calculate what the front is. So the bylaw would indicate that Bricker should be the front yard, which is the shorter of the two, but due to the orientation of the units, Emma Street will be the effective front yard of these townhouses. So that's something that can be discussed as where the setback should be calculated from. And the institutional zone, the retained institutional lot, is proposed to stay institutional, but add special provisions to permit some commercial, neighborhood commercial uses in that zone. And this lot would also require some site-specific relief in terms of the existing front and exterior yard setbacks, the interior yard setbacks from the new lot, and for parking as well. So this lot is pretty close to the central area of Port Elgin. It's currently used as an institutional use. It's a Salvation Army food bank currently. It's surrounded by residential uses, but some commercial in close proximity. And it is fully serviced on municipal servicing at the corner of Bricker and Emma. This is the proposed lot configuration. So the existing church, which is the institutional use, would remain on the retained lot, and the severed would be rezoned to allow the townhouse units. So in terms of the land use policies, there's no major issues that came up from provincial policies. We didn't require any archaeological assessments in this case, and there's no natural heritage issues. It is within the primary urban area of Port Elgin, and it is residential in terms of its designation in the local official plan. So in terms of the official plan, the local official plan, the residential designation does allow for proposed residential use in compatible neighborhood, commercial, and small-scale institutional uses. So within the official plan, we can have those uses within the residential designation. And just to note that neighborhood commercial uses are defined in the official plan as small-scale commercial uses that provide for the daily needs of the population, such as variety convenience stores, personal service establishments, dry cleaning outlets, neighborhood businesses, and professional offices. It should also be noted that this proposal would represent infilling and intensification with the creation of these 5 new dwelling units, and would help contribute to the town's intensification targets, which I'm sure they'll get to how we're doing on that at some point. And yeah, it meets all of the official plan policies in terms of infilling and intensification. Zoning bylaw, as I said, it's currently zoned institutional. Town staff had a number of comments when it was circulated to them, and most of these comments would be able to be dealt with through the consent process or site plan control at that stage, and yeah, will have opportunities to be addressed as the lots are developed. There are no issues from agency comments, and no. There was one comment received since this was put together, just from the neighbor to the south at 660 Emma Street, and they just had some concerns in terms of the setback to their lot and that being reduced, and would like to see a fence between them. And so those are discussions that can be had in terms of providing that fence, and that's quite common for developers to work with neighboring landowners to install fencing and that sort of thing. And so those are the only comments that have been received. So just in terms of the zoning, I'll just go back to this map here. The proposed zoning, I just want to go through some of the issues or things that we need to discuss in terms of the proposed zoning. So in terms of the retained lot, the institutional special, in order to allow some of these neighborhood commercial uses, there's currently no issues with the current use as a food bank, but there are a few things to keep in mind in thinking about the addition of new uses on the lot. There's one correction that I'd like to make to the report that was pointed out to me by the applicant. In the report, in the second paragraph in the zoning area, section, I noted that the access is off of Emma Street for the parking. I can go back to the site plan. So there was at one point access here to the parking, which is at the rear, but that has been roped off, is my understanding. There's a lane here, and that is the primary access to the parking that's currently being used and is intended to continue to be used as the access to the parking at the rear of the church. So generally, neighborhood commercial uses require a 10-meter interior side yard setback, so that would be this setback here. From residential uses, so considerations for the reduced standard of 3.7 meters in this setback should be made, which could include considerations for parking, customer turnover, and traffic volume. In the report, I've gone over the 5 proposed uses. There's more neighborhood commercial uses that are outlined in the official plan, but the applicant has identified 5 that they would like to see on this property. And these are food store, office, convenience store, personal service shop, and restaurant. And I've outlined generally what the parking requirements would be for each of these, and what we believe would be the general kind of hours of operation and intensity of use. It should be noted that I calculated this parking based on 200 square meters of service area, and that's just below the total area of the church. So this would be the maximum parking, really. Like, often there's less service area than the whole of the building. So this would be kind of the maximum of parking that we would require, depending on how that would be developed. So I don't know if I have to go through each of these. It's in the report, but if there's any specific questions about what I've said about any of these 5 uses, I'm happy to answer them. In terms of the severed lot, it would be rezoned, as I said, residential fourth density special to allow for the 5 units townhouse building. It's proposed to be just townhouses at this point, but potentially in the long run it could be converted to freehold, which would have consent along it and would create 5 new lots. But for now, it's being proposed as just the 5-unit street townhouse in the existing development. But they could decide that they do want to sever. So So yeah, so for the purposes of calculating the setbacks, we could treat Emma Street, in the zoning, we could treat Emma Street as the front yard, which would have this be the front yard, this be the rear, and these the side yards. Or as per the zoning bylaw, we would be treating Bricker Street as the front yard, as it is the shorter of the two, and then this would be the front, the rear, and these would be the two side yards. So there's just slight differences in terms of the required setbacks. Otherwise, again, yeah, this, in terms of the zoning, this represents infilling. The proposed density, just so you know, of this site would be 58 units per gross hectare, which is above the town's target of 40 units per gross hectare in high-density areas, but well below the maximum density of 90, just for your information. But I think that pretty much covers it. I'm happy to go over any of the specific questions in terms of those 5 proposed uses on the site, and answer any other questions that you might have.
Thank you, Tessa. So I'll ask, would the applicant like to speak to this issue?
Am I on? Great. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to this application. My name's Jerry Moss, and I represent the Moss family owners of the property, and also the potential developers, Dane Butner and Brandon Ray. And they'll have a few words to say in a couple of minutes. I'd like to just go through really briefly a bit of background information so that you can understand this application a little bit better. So I have a few pictures for you and so on. Go through the details of the plans, and I won't spend much time on compliance with the provincial policy statement in the OP, but we'll mention a bit about the zoning bylaw, and then I'll answer some questions. So this is what the church looks like. It's a Baptist church built in the late 1800s, and it was mentioned we have a tenant in there, the Salvation Army Food Bank, and we're pretty pleased that we have that kind of a community service as a leasee. The picture of the property, it's about 132 feet square. My mind still works in feet, even though we're all using meters now. So that's like 2 old-sized town lots, basically, with the church sitting on the south side of the town of the lot. Tessa went through the location. It's really close to the fire hall, actually, so we'll just spend a minute looking at the... there's the plan to sever the lot. I won't spend any more time on that. I'd like to talk a little bit about the surrounding land uses, because that's kind of curious to me, in fact. The official plan has residential all the way around on the north, east, and south sides, and then core commercial across Bricker Street. But in fact, the zoning bylaw has core commercial all the way around the north, east, and south sides. And although it's core commercial, all of those properties are actually houses, residential houses, but it's zoned core commercial. So it's a bit of a curiosity, in fact, about how that zoning happens on residential property. A couple of pictures. This is the neighbor to the east, and this is Mrs. Byers, who wrote the letter being concerned about setback from the side yard and a fence and so on. This is the northeast and the northerly exposures. So you can see a variety of forms of housing across the intersection of Emma Street and Bricker Street, and then to the west across Bricker Street, that's actually a duplex in the core commercial area. And then to the south across the lane is a residential. We've looked at this, certainly. Just a note, I wanted to make a note about the parking area. It's roughly 6 spaces and really adequately meets all the needs of the current tenant for sure, using the laneway. Pretty hard. I thought it'd be easier to hold this still, but it's really tough, isn't it? There we go. Use the laneway, and it's quite adequate. So currently the plowing, the person who's doing the plowing of the parking area behind is also plowing the laneway, so that we can have access. I'm going to call on either Brandon or Dane to come up here and say a few words about the proposed plan. They haven't flipped the coin yet, so we don't know. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, so this is our concept here. Would basically be walk-up townhouses there.
Were you one of the pointers?
Yeah, I wanted the pointer.
Oh, that's the green.
Okay. So yeah, we have driveways just off Emma Street there. And then we have softscapes in between the driveways. And then also along Bricker there, just kind of a buffer there, as well as to Mrs. Byers' lot there. That's kind of a 3D concept of what we have planned. We're not real stuck on that plan or anything like that. We basically are just after that footprint. That's kind of our floor plan. And we feel that services both transient workers like contract guys at the Bruce and also families. We got 3 bathrooms and 3 bedrooms.
Yeah, we think that the townhouse development will be a really good addition to the neighborhood, actually. And I won't spend much time on these, although indeed this 5-unit townhouse does help with the intensification target wherever we are on that. I guess that's the ethereal number. And it does allow small-scale institutional and neighborhood commercial uses in the area. So just wanted to show you that largely we are complying with the zoning, lot frontage, law, exterior side yard, lot coverage, building height, and landscaped open space. But we are asking for a few changes with regards to the 5-unit townhouse. The lot area needs to be reduced a bit, the interior side yard somewhat, rear yard, and the number of dwelling lots per unit, or per lot, dwellings per lot. With regards to the existing church, we're able to meet all of those requirements in the zoning bylaw, but we're asking for just a couple of changes. And here are those additional permitted uses that we took from the neighborhood commercial list. We're hoping that the Salvation Army stays there forever, but in fact, we can't control that. So at some point, we may need to have another tenant or sell to somebody. So we like to have a little bit longer list of possible uses. And we recognize that some of those uses do increase the traffic, and we would have to consider parking changes in order to accommodate some of those. So we think there are a number of merits to the application. We comply with all of your documents, and we're asking for some reasonable requests. So we hope you can find a way to support us. And be pleased to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, thanks. I'm just going to ask, is there anyone else from the public would like to speak to this application? Excuse me, I'll get that out. If not, then we'll go to the committee. Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm curious to know why we wouldn't just change the zoning on the severance potentially happens on the institutional portion, because it's not a church anymore. Why would we not just change that to commercial core, which would then enable, I think, all of the uses that were mentioned on the list here, and also would then set up that, parking situations are a little bit different when something's zoned commercial core. Is that an option with this to take care of it isn't a church anymore, and to set it up to have potential, could we not just change it to the zoning that is all around that area for that particular portion? Then I have a question about the other lot too. So is that a possibility for this to?
That would require an OPA, an official plan amendment.
Okay.
Because it's residential in the official plan. Core commercial begins right across the street on Bricker, but it would require, to change it to commercial core, it would require an official plan amendment.
Okay. I thought Mr. Moss showed us a drawing that just illustrated commercial core lots all the way around there.
That was zoning, but to change the zoning here to that, we would require it to be an official plan amendment, because those would have been existing, and maybe at the time of the review it might have been brought in, but yes, because it's designated residential, we would have to change the designation. Yeah.
Okay. Is it not possible then to just have wording that, because it's an institutional use right now, is it not possible to just make the wording that anything that's possible in the commercial core is possible here? Rather than be so restrictive to say restaurant, the items that are listed there. I'm just not understanding, because anyway, I'll just leave you with that thought. Perhaps, I don't know if it's Mr. Moss or maybe we'll get Dane up there for this one. When you look at the neighborhood, and thank you very much for having all the pictures there, character sort of relates to a lot of different things. I appreciate that you put a check mark there about the height thing. Most of the properties around there would appear to be 1 or 2 stories high. The townhouse drawings, the concept that you've got looks to be 3 stories. Can I assume that perhaps there's a partial below grade element there, or is it basically 3 stories that we're talking about?
Councilor Minaj.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm a little bit confused with the apples and the oranges part here. I understand the owner of the property wishes to ask for a split in the property and create an existing institutional zone where he would like to change the approved uses and create an R4 zone for somebody else in the future to develop that lot. And I appreciate the effort, and I appreciate both sides of the proposals coming, but this really is about the owner asking for. We can't be influenced by a proposed townhome development at this time, because no change. Mr. Moss isn't going to develop those townhomes. There's a prospective person coming in the future that's going to be doing that after the zoning has been completed. So I thought that it's a good proposal to split that property into 2, and I would go in a completely different tack, Mr. Mayor, and I would ask that we consider office residential for a new zone. And I believe that it's incumbent upon us to change what is an archaic zone requirement that was probably put together when I was on Port Elgin Council many years ago, when we didn't know that the rest of the community was suddenly going to become 3 together, and we didn't know that we were going to have lots of other land available for commercial development. So we thought it was a good idea to explore the core commercial and move it back into the residential areas, giving people an opportunity to develop there, where in fact that's no longer the case, and it shouldn't be the case. We should be wanting that to be residential, and we should be looking, in my opinion, we should be looking for all of that to be rezoned to what it is, residential. And I would ask that the institutional piece be legal non-conforming in an office residential zone, and it too would be residential. And so I would ask you to look, the planners to look at the option of office residential. I do not believe that it would be appropriate for us to consider, well, I shouldn't say that, a restaurant in the future, but office residential offers a lot more opportunity for what it's actually currently being used for, and is more conducive to the development of that area in a residential envelope in my mind. So is that possible?
I think that's one of the permitted uses, is an office here. It's one of the permitted uses that they're requesting, so yeah, it's possible if this gets approved.
So, Mr. Mayor, follow up, thank you for that. So I would say it could be a church, it could be an office, and it could be residential. And I think that we need to move away from the store and restaurant considerations, although I'm not negative towards the restaurant. Obviously, tea rooms and other restaurants have existed in a similar kind of structure. But if we just get to the point where we split the two properties into two zones, I really think we need to look at the surrounding area. And I know what you said about an official plan amendment. We would be in the same position asking for that to be office residential. Is that correct?
First of all, it's been designated residential, and so that's sort of what is driving this. If it became core commercial, it's not consistent with the official plan currently, and that's what the mention of triggering an official plan amendment came about, because now to convert the institutional use to core commercial, you're actually converting it to a use that isn't permitted in the residential designation. So there may be a number of options, as you mentioned, on how this could be zoned, one of which may be a mixed-use office residential, perhaps. I'd have to look to see what your official plan permits in the residential area, if it does, in fact, permit a mixed-use office residential. I don't know off the top of my head.
Ed? Thank you. Can I ask you, Mr. Mayor, how we can ask the planning department to look at, I know Jerry, Mr. Moss, has indicated some additional uses for that retained institutional piece, but for me, I would like to ask if we can ask the planning department to explore further the office residential concept and explore further the change from core commercial back to the residential that it should be.
I think that's, again, there would be a separate application and a separate process to this altogether, and I think the best time to deal with that would be at the next update of the official plan, which isn't that far away. You look at it, you look at the whole area there instead of picking it off piecemeal. I suspect that's what went through when the official plan was adopted. There was probably lots of discussion. I know there was, and they've come with that. Now, if there's some ideas about changing all that, then if it's not driven by the applicant, then I think it should come when we do the 5-year update.
Thank you. So I'm okay with the 5-year update for changing the core commercial to residential. Can we ask the planners to discuss with the applicant the potential for looking at office residential for a change to that particular?
How about we ask the applicant? I mean, the application has requested these additional permitted uses. So, Jerry, would you be...
To be honest with you, I'm not certain what the permitted uses are in office residential. So I'm unclear whether I'd be a proponent of that or not. But I thought that the primary use in office residential was the residential component, and that the office part, or the quasi-commercial part, was ancillary to the residential. But I might be wrong on that.
I suspect, this office residential, I don't know where you're getting at, Neil. I don't even think it's a zone in their zoning bylaw, to be honest with you. I don't think it is office residential. Okay. Just hang on, Neil. Can you hang on? So I think what we're dealing with is an application that's been brought by the applicant, and he's asked for these uses. I think we need, if you've raised a question here, if Mr. Moss wants that, I suspect he can talk to the planners and bring it back to us in the zoning bylaw amendment. If he doesn't want that, then he can not do that, and we can deal with it when it comes back with a recommendation. But I think generally, I think you've got a pretty good plan here, and it's a vacant piece of property that's going to be a great use, I suspect. Any further questions?
Just a comment, Mr. Mayor, as a follow-up. I also believe it's 5-unit townhouses and expanding the use of that property. I really like the presentation put together. I agree with most of the changes, and I just wanted to commend Mr. Moss and developers for what they brought forward. I think we're dealing with intensification in numbers. It's helping the cause there. I think it's a parcel of land that would suit that. So I just wanted to commend you for bringing this forth.
Any further questions? Thank you very much. And so there will be a recommendation at a future meeting for this committee to decide on. Thank you. So the next item on the agenda, these are reports, so they're not public meetings. There is a delegation to start with. Sorry, there's a delegation, and it's from Mr. Tom Fenton, and it's concerning item 6.2.1 zoning bylaw amendment 68-17.44. And I'll ask Tom if you want to come up and make your presentation.
Well, the first thing I think I would like to ask for here is a deferral on this matter. But one question that came in on your draft was external infrastructure works. What would their estimated cost be, and what are we talking about with external infrastructure works?
You're asking that question now, Tom?
I'm asking somebody if they can tell me what that means.
Okay. I suspect one of our staff could. Maybe we can probably get this. We can probably deal with this fairly quickly. If you're asking for a deferral for it, we can probably do that. And if you can work with planning staff and our staff to clarify that, is it
mentioned in your draft that I have to participate in the external infrastructure works? And I'd asked Jay actually if he could send me an email and let me know what it consists of and what the estimated costs are.
Okay. All right.
I assume it has to do
Can
with...
you talk to this, Jay? I don't want to put you on the spot if you're... Okay. We can get that information for you, Tom.
Okay.
Oh, sure.
And whatever this is this just for me, or is it for all the landowners on Bruce Road 25?
And we can get that information for you, too. I think I suspect that any new development is... Do you want to speak to it, Jay?
Speaking about generally the potential off-site improvements, we've got in our development charges background study, as council knows, there's a range of infrastructure projects that might have or that have local improvement charges attached to them. So development in the areas of those projects contributing directly to those projects. So in the south end of construction of Bruce Road 25, what part of the property we're talking about, maybe the extension. So a number of infrastructure projects along as the dollars we're able to share more.
That for all the landowners on County Road 5 then?
There are a number specifically that are identified as potential.
So,
And the scale of development. I can't commit to that either without consultation.
So in closing, I would like to ask for a deferral on this matter.
Okay, then I will ask the committee, would you like to defer this issue? Vice Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
Thank you, Mr. Ragg. I can support a deferral. I just would like to know the reason for the deferral or what we expect is going to transpire. Do you have a reason, Mr. Benton, that you're looking for a deferral?
I would like to discuss it with a planner.
I would make the motion to defer, Mr. Mayor.
The Deputy Mayor and seconded by Councillor Madison. All in favor? Opposed? That's deferred then to a future date. So
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. So the next item on the agenda then is, we've dealt with the next item on the agenda. So the next item then will be 6.2.2. It's zoning bylaw amendment 69-17.44 for Richard and Jennifer Lamb for Miramichi Bay Road. And again, I'll turn it over to Tessa for the report and recommendation.
Great. So as you can see, we've got the information up there on the screen. So I'm here to provide a recommendation on this matter. And we've considered all the land use planning policies and the comments we've received. And we've gone through the entire Planning Act checklist. And yeah, today is our day to recommend a decision. So just to recap what this proposal was, this is to rezone the subject lands in order to permit a standalone accessory building. So they want to build a garage on this residential property, and in 5+ years' time, they intend to build their house, or they've indicated an intention to build a house, but currently would, or for the short to medium term, they've indicated it would be a standalone accessory building. And so this is the proposed site plan. So no development in the EP. They're proposing to build this building shortly, and then the rest to come at a later date. Now, our recommendation is that the zoning bylaw amendment be refused, and that instead council approve a temporary use bylaw for the proposed accessory building. So we don't have any real issues from the public or from an official plan standpoint, but we do believe that the temporary use bylaw is the best tool in this situation to address the issue. Our main concern with recommending the proposed zoning bylaw from the applicant is that once it's enforced in effect, the town will have little recourse to force the demolition of the garage, as it would be a legal use per the bylaw should the house never be built. There's really no recourse to force the construction of the house long term. We can't impose conditions on a zoning, and so it leaves very little wiggle room. However, we do have the tool of the temporary use bylaw, which allows for the imposition of time limits for the permission on use of the land. So this would mean that the expiration of the bylaw after 3 years, at that point, the use would go back to being non-complying, and at that point, the town could force demolition. Now, the applicants have indicated that the 3-year time frame is too short. However, they have the opportunity to apply for extensions up to 3 years after the bylaw is passed. So there is an opportunity to go beyond 3 years, but they do require to apply for an extension of the temporary use bylaw. So that's really a recommendation. We've gone over the proposal in the information meeting, so you have all the details. So if there's any, I don't know if there's much more that I'm going to say here, other than we think that the temporary use bylaw would comply with the local official plan, as all bylaws have to. So we wouldn't have an issue there. And yeah, that would be the main the main thing. So yeah, if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Okay, let's start here with Councillor Dave Mayette. And
thank you, Mr. Mayor. I understand what you're saying, and it actually makes a lot of sense. And but what is preventing us from granting them a 5-year temporary use bylaw change to give them what they're saying they can't do it in 3 years, but they're going to retire in 5 years and commence building? Why wouldn't we just give it to them right off the front, or make it 6 years?
The Planning Act is what limits it. Yeah, no, the Planning Act allows for temporary use bylaws for up to 3 years, and then allows for the application of extensions beyond them, but it doesn't allow. That's just how the Planning Act is written.
In giving that approval, could there be wording put in there that it's understood that the applicants were requesting longer than 3 years, and that it's expected that they would be coming back looking for an extension, so that if there's a completely new set of people sitting here in 3 years' time, that they wouldn't have to say we've already done 3 years, why would we give you 3 more years? Like, have it something in there to indicate that this is, we're playing within these rules. That's all I'm saying. Just for the sake of the applicant, I feel for them that they're going to put a $100,000 building up with the looming 3 years down the road that they might get a demolition permit. It just doesn't really make anybody feel good.
I don't think they would necessarily have to. My understanding of the Planning Act, and Bruce can potentially correct me, is they wouldn't have to wait 3 years to apply for that extension. Once this bylaw is in force and effect, they could come in and apply for that extension the next week if they wanted to. It just says that once the temporary use bylaw has been granted, then they can apply for an extension. So we would make that clear to them that they have that option.
If you made that clear, I would be in support of supporting an extension right off the bat.
Vice Deputy Mayor Hubert.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just for clarification, whenever they start building anything, they have to pay the full development fees before any kind of building permit is issued. Would that be correct?
So that's the agreement that's been entered into with the town, is that should the zoning bylaws proposed be approved, they would pay, and they've agreed to pay $15,000 off as development charges. But if the temporary use bylaw were approved, then it might be different. Then there might be different provisions, because it would the securities are in the temporary use. It's not. It wouldn't be as important to encourage them to build that, to build the house eventually, by demanding all the development charges up front, because they would have that time limit use. So the town might decide just to collect the development charges needed for the accessory building, but I would have to leave that to the town to decide what they would do.
Can I just then, through you, $15,000 is almost the entire development charge on a R1 kind of zone property, is it not? Like why would? Because I believe it's about $18,000, right?
Well, some clarification there. The Lambs have said they're willing to pay that much. It's not what we have agreed to. We have said what our requirements are, and we're working towards, if this is passed, we will be working with the Lambs on an agreement to secure the construction of the house at a future date, and make it the cost sufficient enough that there'll be a strong commitment to do that, and that we can enforce it. Additionally, the actual DCs in this area, because there's no sanitary, are much lower. They're like 7,000 to 8,000. But so we'd be trying to get that DC up front plus enough to make it worth the while to do this. If this was obviously if this was a bylaw that council chose to pass.
And I appreciate what Councillor Mayette said in the response given to him. How much is it going to cost if 3 weeks after a temporary use bylaw gets passed through council, if they were then to turn around and almost immediately apply for an extension, what's the application fee for that? Is it $150?
No, it would be the same as a regular zoning, because it would, I believe. I mean, we could discuss that. We haven't talked about it, but.
If I may, through you, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure that it was ever intended that you use a temporary use bylaw that way. It seems to me that the passage of time over 3 years is perhaps what factors into the council's decision at that time, as opposed to having them approve two consecutive 3-year temporary use bylaws. I don't know the legality of that specifically, but I would guess that if they had intended that you could give a 6-year temporary use bylaw, it would be stated in the Act currently, and we wouldn't be having this discussion.
Anybody else want to speak? You want to speak, Luke? Go ahead.
I think it would be neat to test whether that would happen or not. If it is the case that that's possible in the Act, I'm not certain why we wouldn't just pass two bylaws, one giving them the temporary use and one extending it. We could do that all at once and give it to them for 6 years. That's what I would do. But I'm also not entirely clear. I'm still not. I guess I'm trying to make myself feel terrified about having a zoning bylaw amendment that allows a accessory building to stand on this lot, and if that was the case forever. But I just can't get terrified of that. I'm having a real hard time finding a problem with that. We're in a universe where the sky falls after that happens. I just don't sense it. So I guess I'd be supportive of the zoning bylaw amendment. Frankly, I'd give them permission to build it, amend the zoning bylaw, and permit it for the time being. Because ultimately, this is a valuable lot on the lakefront where a house will be built. Because it's useless. I mean, it would be crazy for somebody to own this property and have a shed on it. That's not going to remain the case for a long time. The market wouldn't permit that to happen, in my view. So I would say that I would be supportive of granting the zoning bylaw amendment, allowing it to go ahead, collect the DCs up front, go the route that they were talking before. There's enough financial incentive, first to how much they're going to have invested, and just the general market forces in place along the waterfront in this community. The house is going to get built. So that's the way I'd go with it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. Look, I mean, we're jumping. I really can envision a council not granting another extension. I mean, you're going to go down there and say, tear that thing down. We're dancing around trying to make this thing legal. And if you're inclined to support it, I would be agreeing with you that the zoning bylaw would be the amendment to the zoning bylaw. Mike?
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I echo that. And as a matter of fact, I'd like to, if it's permissible, to place a motion on the floor that the zoning bylaw amendment says 16, 17, 44B be approved. I think that, I agree with the comments from our deputy mayor that there's a $1.1 million structure being constructed here in the next 5 years. I think there's a bit of trust involved, and there's going to be a good assessment on that property. I don't believe for a minute they're building a garage to come up and live in it. Perhaps staff could be checking that once or twice a year to make sure they're not living in it. I don't know. It creates a little bit of extra work for staff, but I rather like staff's comments further down where they talk, if we decide to approve the bylaw, that we provide for sufficient security as the owner and ensure the accessory structure is well. And then talk about moving, but collect the right fees, development charges, and other fees that staff feel that would be appropriate. So negotiate with the landowner. But I like to move, Mr. Mayor, that this zoning bylaw amendment be approved. Thank you.
Councilor Minaj.
I believe them too, and I could second the motion. but what I would want to know is this, simply this. There's nothing to prevent them as owners from driving up with a fifth wheel trailer and parking it on the property and living in the fifth wheel trailer while they build their garage and storage unit. Is that a true statement or a false statement?
I'm informed it's a false statement. Best way perhaps to deal with it would be, I mean, there's a recommendation here. How do you want I think we have some clarity here. So I have a mover and a seconder for permitting the zoning bylaw amendment that would, or passing a zoning bylaw amendment that would permit the accessory building to be built first. You can write the bylaw a lot better than I can, but I think you know the intent, correct?
Yeah, I mean, it would just, the bylaw would have to read that it would permit a standalone detached accessory structure. We can't impose conditions in a zoning bylaw. So we can't impose a condition that says it has to be first before a house is built.
Yeah.
We can't do that. So it would just allow the accessory structure.
Okay, so that is what's Neil second. So you clear, the mover clear with that? The seconder clear with that? Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. That's the end of our agenda. So I guess I have a motion that's moved by Councillor Minaj and seconded by Vice Deputy Mayor Huber that this planning committee meeting of December the 18th, 2017 hereby adjourned at 8:30. All in favor? We're adjourned.